Welcome to the Business of College Consulting podcast. I'm your host, Brooke Daly, founder and CEO of Advantage College Planning and Advantage College Planning Franchising. Building a business is not for the faint of heart. In the Business of College Consulting podcast, you'll hear stories from successful college consultants on how they grew their business and the challenge and successes they had along the way. Grab your notebook and pen and get ready to be inspired. Hello, everyone. I am really excited to welcome Kristina Dooley of Estrela College Consulting on the podcast today. She's also the IECA past president, and we're really excited to hear from her. Welcome, Kristina.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you too, Brooke.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and just jump in and get started. I would love to hear from you. How did you decide to start Estrela Consulting, and what was that process like? How did you decide to get into business?
My startup story is not typical, I don't think. My background is in college admission, and then I worked in boarding school admission. And as an admission officer, I would attend the IECA conferences representing my schools. And I would come back from those conferences and I would always say to my husband, when I grow up, I want to be an independent educational consultant. And I didn't know if I would actually follow through with that. I just thought, gosh, their job seemed perfect for me because in the schools that I was at, for example, I worked at my alma mater, the college that I went to. So I had a bias to that school. But when students would come into my office for interviews and we were not the right fit, I often felt like, oh gosh, I wish I could tell them where to look if it were for not it. Where is the place they should be? And so that's what really I think was attracted to me about doing this kind of work, because I was curious about other schools. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. I only went to college about an hour away from home. So I was really, really just in a kind of a bubble. And so as I'd attend these conferences, I'd learn about all these schools while I was standing next to people at the college fair. And I think, gosh, that's so cool to learn about all these different programs. So the fast forward is that my husband works in corporate finance, and his job, they offered him an opportunity to move to Sao Paulo, Brazil in 2008. And I had been working in the boarding school that I was at. I'd been there for 3 years, and I was doing admission work. I was also one of the college counselors. And I said to him, maybe this is my time to do this. You know, I don't know how long we'll be abroad, so it didn't make sense for me to look for an opportunity in an international school. And so he said, yeah, go for it. And so Estrela is the Portuguese word for star. They speak Portuguese in Brazil. And so that was really where my business came from. We moved and I jumped right in. It's about September of 2008 was when I launched. So that's my story. It was kind of fast and furious, but I knew it was what I wanted to do. And I shouldn't say I never looked back, but I didn't look back at the beginning.
I think
we can get into that.
Went up a little bit hearing that you're moving to Brazil and starting a business at the same. What was more difficult?
Oh gosh, learning Portuguese was the most difficult. It was. I will say, people laugh because oftentimes I'm known to say, like, I am not a business person, and people laugh at me about that because they're like, but wait, you own a business, and you have multiple employees, and that kind of thing. But I will say, for me, I'm a creative. So when it comes to launching a business, and I'm a networker, 100%. I'm somebody who and that's why I worked in admission and why I loved it, because I could go out and I could sell, anything. And I thought, you know what, I really believe in what educational consultants do. And so the thought of launching the business was scary, but I knew, even though I had a huge learning curve to learn about the institutions that existed outside of the ones I was familiar with in Northeast Ohio, I knew I could do it. I love learning. I'm someone, and I think everyone knows, Steve Antonoff's quote that we're students of colleges. And I think I fall into that because I always say, I would love to stay in school forever, but I feel like that's what we do. We're constantly learning about things. So that part wasn't super scary to me, but the business part, for sure was a little scary because I didn't really know how businesses were run. I'd never done that. And truthfully, like, even when I was younger and babysit, I didn't really like that. I didn't want to start like a babysitting business. I love babysitter club books, but I never wanted to be the one running the babysitter club. So that was probably the scarier part. The moving piece of it, I was thrilled. I could not wait for an adventure. And my husband always laughs because and other people have heard me say this, that my first and only question I asked my husband when he came home and said, what would you think about moving to Brazil? My only question was, can we take the dog? We didn't have kids at the time. I was just like so concerned. Can our dog come as well? But I was so excited to leave Ohio because it was, I'd been to Pennsylvania, maybe Canada once, it was just, for me, really exciting. So, yeah.
So who were your first clients? Did you get clients from Ohio or did you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't have a client from Ohio until I repatriated, until I came back to the US in 2013. So my very first clients, actually, I mentioned I love to network. I love meeting people. So I joined pretty much every kind of expat club you could imagine in Sao Paulo, Brazil, which there are a lot. I joined them all. And I would attend events, networking lunches, they had craft fairs. And at the time, the first thing I did was I had really nice business cards printed, which was like one of the pieces of advice someone gave me, like, don't skimp on the cost of your business cards. Don't get cheap thin paper ones, get nice ones that people will remember. And I do that still. I have the same exact cards. My address has changed, but other than that. And so what I did was I bought, and this maybe sounds like a lofty thing to like even do, but I bought 1,000 business cards, which I know people when they're first starting, they think, should I buy 25? Should I buy 100? I bought 1,000. This box shows up, 1,000 business cards. And my husband's like, who are you going to give those to? I'm like, I'm going to meet 1,000 people and I'm going to tell them what I'm doing. And so I bought the cards. I put them in every purse. We're women, we have a lot of purses. Every purse I owned had a little stack of cards in it. Everywhere I went, I would give them to people. And so my first clients were people who I met through those networking groups. A lot of them were other expat women whose children were either attending the local international schools. Some of them had kids in boarding schools abroad. And I would just tell them about my background. And I was very transparent that I was just starting as an independent counselor. And they hired me. And the other group, interestingly enough, a lot of people don't know this, is that my practice actually started primarily working with boarding school seeking families. Although now my practice is almost exclusively college. When I lived abroad, there was a big market for boarding schools in the US, international and expat families looking for boarding schools for their children. And I had just come from working in a boarding school and actually had a really strong familiarity with the boarding schools in the US. And so those were some of my first clients were families seeking boarding schools and academic summer programs at boarding schools. So yeah, I know that was a long-winded answer, but that's really where my first clients came from, where that group of people. It was hard to break into Ohio when I got back, though. You asked that question. I will say, sometimes I'll tell, I teach in the UC Irvine certificate program for independent educational consulting. And I'll tell my students sometimes, when I came back to the US after living abroad for 5 years, I almost had to start my business again because it was a whole new market. Marketing to domestic families is very different than marketing to international families and expat families. And so I moved to Ohio, where I can tell you, there are not many independent educational consultants here. And so the idea of our profession was one, I had to first educate people on what we even did, what was this job, and then sell myself and sell the business, the work that I was doing. So I kind of had a second startup at that point in time. And that was hard. That was a hard thing for me as well.
Yes, especially when you're flying along in Brazil, doing your thing and getting your clients, and then all of a sudden you have to start back at, that's tough. That's really tough. So how long did it take you to ramp back up in your new market in Ohio?
So I skipped over a couple of countries in my story, but we moved from Brazil to Argentina and then Argentina to Mexico City. And so over the 5-year period, I lived in 3 different countries. So it's interesting when people say, how have you adjusted to remote work during the pandemic, for example? And we've always done remote work. I've worked remotely with students when we were using Skype and we had the log, the bad connections. And so for me, that was nothing, but when we came back to Ohio, I tried a similar approach. I joined things like the Chamber of Commerce in my community. I tried some meetup groups. I tried a lot of different things. I was in a very different life stage at that time as well, because I came back from abroad with a new business, but also with triplets. And I know some people know that about me, that I've got, well, now they're 12. Oh, pray for me. They're 12-year-old triplets, but when I came back from abroad, they were 3. And so I was not only coming back to learn how to live back in the US with 3 small children, but also trying to reestablish a business. So when I say that I mentioned earlier that my path in consulting, I never really looked back. There was one moment I did, and that was when we moved back. And that was, for me, I had an opportunity to go back into an independent school in a college counseling role. And it was really attractive because it was unknown. You know, I knew what I would be doing, and I knew the world here. And my husband, actually, he said to me, you know, Kristina, you've spent 5 years building a business. You've got children now, so you can set your own schedule with this business. And why would you change that? Why would you go back and work for somebody and have a traditional, you know, daytime job, which wouldn't allow me to do things with my children, like be class mom, you know, or do anything like that, or go on the field trip with them? And I am really thankful that he pointed that out, because that was true. As much of the challenge as it was to kind of restart the business again here, I'm really, really grateful that I was able to do the things I was able to do with my kids when they were young, and still continue to do as a, you know, even in this role. I know we put in a lot of hours as ed consultants, and I know, Brooke, you know, the same, you know, with our kids, that we probably all look at what we do as actually a bonus, because it has allowed us probably to do things with our kids and see them go through things that we might not if we had been working in a traditional 9-to-5 setting somewhere. So yeah, so the ramp up back when we moved back to Ohio, it was, again, I tried some of the same strategies, but it was hard because people didn't know what this was. Had I repatriated to a different community in a different location, like LA or Chicago or New York or something, might have been different, but Cleveland, Ohio, it's just not a thing here.
It's so funny, Kristina. So I just interviewed on a different episode a colleague in Indiana who had the same exact experience, not moving 3 different countries, but actually she did live abroad and came back and started a consulting business in her community. She said that was the most difficult part, was it essentially educating the community that college consultants exist, or educational consultants exist. And I had the same experience in Raleigh in 2008. No parent knew what a college consultant was or what we did. Like, who are you paying? What? Like, what? Or, you know, who do I pay? It was a foreign concept. So that's a big hurdle. You know, as a consumer, if you already know what you want to buy, it's a different buying decision, and you don't even know that you need this or want to buy this, right? So you have to. So yeah, that's a huge challenge. So now, can you just paint a picture of what your team looks like now, and a little bit about that growth story? Like, when did you decide to hire your first employee?
So when I moved back in 2013, I was still working remotely, primarily with a lot of kids globally, because that was my referral source, were, you know, families that had known me from abroad. And so in terms of the growth of my team, in 2015, I mentioned my husband worked in corporate finance, and he decided, I joke and I call it his sabbatical from corporate life. He took a small break intentionally to help me grow my business. When I say I'm not the business person, he is the business person. He's very business minded, very strategic, can analyze things in a way that I can't. So I feel very fortunate for that in terms of my business, that he's been helpful in that way. So he and I put together a plan to grow Estrela, and the growth plan was initially to grow by adding a test prep component. So I opened a physical office space here outside of Cleveland, and we hired at the time, I think it was 8 tutors. We had 8 ACT, SAT, PSAT tutors that we trained to do basically test prep in this office space. We had a beautiful office space. I'm talking in the past because, of course, we're now back to remote after the pandemic. But my first hire, though, before the tutors was I hired someone whose title is Client Experience Manager. And that title was really intentional because I did not want someone who felt like an administrative assistant solely. I wanted them to understand that they were truly an integral part of our team. And I also wanted our families to know that their experience is valuable to us. We want to make sure that we're hitting all the marks that we need to in terms of client relationships and satisfaction. And I'm really happy to say that my client experience manager, who we hired in 2015, is still with me today. She's my first hire. Awesome. Love her. People know her, she's the first contact that people have. Any inquiry that comes in, she's the one who talks with them about our value. She can walk them through. She's an empathetic person. She can listen, but she is not an educational consultant. She doesn't play one on TV. She doesn't want to be one, as far as I know, which is great because then she doesn't handle those questions. If someone says, well, my child took this test or my child's looking at this school, that's not her area of expertise. But what she is great at is managing the client experience and in terms of things like onboarding, follow-up, et cetera. So that was my first hire. And then we hired the tutors. And we didn't hire our first consultant until about a year later. And at that point, we hired several. We actually brought on 6 consultants in kind of a cohort of consultants all at one time. And most of them are still with us today. So we've got several that are still part of our team. So the makeup of my team right now, the answer to that question is actually we're in a not transition, but we're in a growth period again. And so we have 8 consultants that are part of our team, including myself. And we currently have 2 essay specialists that handle only essay work. And then we have our client experience manager, Connie. So you might be wondering, because I'm not mentioning the tutors, we sunsetted that program in 2019. I realized fairly early on, actually, probably I should have moved quicker on this in terms of decisions in terms of business, that I didn't want to be a test prep company. That was not something that I dreamt about. It wasn't joyful. It did not bring me joy. And to do that, it was a bit of logistical nightmare in a lot of ways, even though you have all these platforms where you can do scheduling. It never worked out the way we had hoped it would. And so we really wanted to focus on the college planning piece. So that's what we did in 2019.
I would say your students probably agreed with you too, right? No students enjoy the test prep process.
And and part of it also for me was like, this, and I think a lot of educational consultants grapple with, the feelings about testing and, do I want to be someone that's perpetuating some of those things I don't really love about the college admission process? And so I just didn't want to do it anymore. And to be honest, we have some private test prep companies locally and one national one that we really liked a lot. So I felt comfortable referring that business out. We still get inquiries today for test prep, and I've got people who that's their focus and that's what they want to do, and they're great at doing that. And so and then they refer families to us for college planning. So it's a nice win-win for all the relationships involved.
Yeah, I love that. I'm sure it wasn't an easy decision to pull the test prep away either, because if you're anything like me, once you add something, it's like, no, we're going to make this work.
And it's a revenue stream. I mean, that's the other thing, is like you're taking away a revenue stream. So you have to figure out is there something else that we can do? And for me, the easy thing was, if we put a bigger focus on the college planning, did more of our marketing and college planning, that would replace that. And we added some other alternate types of packages, for example, more like an essay only package, like that kind of stuff that we marketed a little bit more specifically once we got rid of the test prep piece of it. Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. So what do you enjoy most about working with a team? Now you have a fairly large team. What do you love?
Oh gosh, I love my team, and I think they know that. There's a great, by the way, for anyone listening, if you're ever looking for something that if you want to let people know that you are appreciative of them on your team during COVID, when we were all remote anyway, but I just wanted to make sure my team knew like that I still thought we were so important as a whole. There's a great book by Simon Sinek, not a business book, but a book called Better Together, and it's a children's book. Actually, it's awesome. So, I said it to my team. I said, we need this. Like, this is us, and we're going to stick together. We're going to get through this. I'm so cheesy in that way, Brooke. I mean, I think a lot of people probably know that about me. But in terms of what I love about the team, I mean, there is something about knowing that you have people that you can go to celebrate your bright spots and your landmines. Like you can go in and say, like, this was awesome today. And it could be personal. It can be, if something having to do with our personal lives, it can be a work related thing. Or, sometimes as we all know, as the cycle goes on, it is nice to have those people that you can go and say, you know what, this is what I'm experiencing with a family, or, I know that I can go to any of the people on my team and to, again, share in our wins or commiserate about things. And we use a tool called Slack, which I know a lot of other teams use. And it's basically a messaging platform. And we have a water cooler channel on there. So it's just like if we were in an office. So we just want to share a video of us singing karaoke, which I won't name my team members who like to do that, but it could be that, it can be whatever. And then we have a channel that's celebrate wins. So if anybody has like just something that they want to share, it's really great to do that too. And so that's what I love about having a team and just in general.
Yeah, I love that. And then on the flip side, what are the challenges with managing a team?
The challenges with managing a team, especially a remote team, which I should say, I have team members who I actually have never physically been in the same room with before, which is kind of odd, when you think about it. But it doesn't bother me all that much. But I will say there are challenges sometimes when you can't say, let's all convene in the conference room in 5 minutes. Like that's a challenge. We do meet as a team, but it's scheduled, so there's not some of that those organic things that happen when you're in person. But challenges with the team is just, I would say probably making sure that everyone is delivering services in a consistent way. And that's one thing. As an example, I'm super excited. One of my team members, we just moved her into a director of college planning role with Estrela. And one of our goals is to look at what we're doing and see, have we along the way maybe lost some of that consistency? Everyone was trained the same way, and everyone's doing an awesome job in terms of deliverables and also the way that we run meetings and all those things. But as we work independently as well, you start to develop your own ways of doing things. We want to kind of rein that in a little bit. It's a hard thing to do. We have it's not a negative, but I really, I think in terms of brand, I think it's important to make sure as a business owner that families' experiences are the same. One of my favorite quotes, I'll give a shortened version of it. It's a quote by Michael Eisner, who was the CEO of Disney. And he says, the quote, basically the gist is, a brand is a living entity, the product of 1,000 small gestures. And I really believe that these little things that you do, that all makes up your brand. It's not just your logo and your colors and your e-newsletter and whatever. It's all these little things. And so that's a challenge with a business, is to make sure that your brand is all those little pieces that feel consistent.
Yes, I know all about that challenge, Kristina.
Yeah.
Yes. And actually, I was just having this conversation with the teammate that, and she mentioned, she's like, I appreciate that we have a really strong framework, but that each individual is able to provide us, their own, or I guess infuse their own personality into students. But you're right, there is such a delicate balance. And I think the process is what we're most concerned about. Is we don't want a consultant giving a family a college list 2 months before everyone else is getting them, or
right.
You're right. It is tough, especially when you're managing a whole bunch of, remote employees. Like, how do you make sure that you're all on the same page? Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything that you miss from those early days of starting Estrela?
Oh gosh. I will say, and this is something that when I talk with new consultants or people like just launching their businesses and they're asking about how to get your name out and how to promote. One of the things I did very frequently when I first started was, and some people may know this about me, I have a master's degree in journalism and public relations. And so I love to write. And in the early days, I had time. I could write. I wrote for lots of web-based publications, expat publications. I wrote for the there was a newsletter that was distributed at the U.S. Embassy in Sao Paulo for the American Society and the English-speaking community. I wrote a monthly column for them. And so those early days, that was one of the ways that I kind of established my credibility in this space was I would write about topics. And so I was seen as an expert in things. I don't have time to do that now. I every time something happens in higher ed, which we know is daily almost, I think, gosh, I should write a blog post about that. Luckily, we have things like we can do webinars, we can do quick, Facebook Lives, but I feel like the shelf life of those maybe isn't as long as like a really solid blog post that people can reference. So kind of, I miss that early part. I loved also early on, I spent a lot of my early time doing visits, and I still do that. I'm a CEP, so I need to recertify every 5 years. So I do spend a lot of time on campus visits, but at the early stages, I was doing much more, I really, and I had time again. And I do miss having a large boarding school seeking population, because I will tell you, as much as I love the college folks, for any of my boarding school friends out there, they are just the most incredible admission people. And I miss that. I wish I had a larger client base of boarding school folks. It just doesn't, for me in my location, it doesn't make sense to really push that to grow, because I just don't, in Ohio, boarding school is not a Midwestern mentality at all. Not if I was in the Northeast, it'd be different. But I miss that because I really established some awesome relationships with people, which I still have them now, but I miss that.
Yeah, I can imagine. Oh, that's so cool that I didn't realize that you have a master's in journalism and PR. That's awesome. So,
yeah, it's helpful. It's helpful with.
I bet it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's something too. Is like it's a having a robust business and having a growing practice is great, but it does mean you sacrifice some of the things that maybe you found enjoyable at the early stages and took time. You could take the time to really do some of the things. Whereas, and I try not to be reactive with things. I try to be proactive in terms of marketing and business things. But the reality is sometimes you can't be in this world. So I do, the writing for me, it's nice because I can do something quickly. I can come up, now everyone uses Canva, to create things, but I feel like the marketing stuff, I love that. If I could just do a lot of that, I would, but I just right now haven't had a lot of time. But that was part of the reasoning and push for me to move my colleague into more of a role to guide our team, the consultant team, so that I can spend more time doing some things, working on the business.
Yeah, that's awesome. How has your marketing changed since you added your team? It seems like you have an atypical team growth process. Like you grew big quickly, adding on a fairly large, I would say, cohort of employees. So how has your marketing strategy changed over the course of that time?
Gosh, that's a good question. When we first brought on our team, because they were all new to Estrela, they didn't have established reputations themselves. And for those who run multi-consultant practices, you probably, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, Brooke, that it's hard sometimes to get families to want to work with someone who's not you. And so the marketing has changed a bit in that when we first brought on our team members, I felt it was really important for them, just as I had done, to establish their own credibility by doing things like authoring blog posts, doing webinars, Facebook Lives, that kind of thing, so that it was more than just Kristina as the face of Estrela, that we had, all these other folks as well could be seen as knowledgeable as I am. And so the marketing has shifted a bit because I don't want to say they don't need to do that as much, but we've done a bit less of that, where we're trying to intentionally get them out to market themselves, but more, I'd say our marketing now is we're focusing on who our messaging, I guess, is a good way to say it. Because especially, that when we get inquiries and it's someone who's seeking services that are unethical, really not at all the kind of blanking on the word, but the vibe that we want to exude in terms of our work. We are not high pressure. We are not, here's my marketing is I like to share, for example, our outcomes, but I don't cherry pick 10 schools because I think that those names will make people go, wow, look at those schools that that those students have been accepted to. Instead, I want to share the whole list of 150 colleges or something like that the students have been accepted to, because I want families to look at that and say, these are people who take seriously fit and finding the right place for my child, not for, this have a, standard list of 20 colleges that all this kids apply to. We never ever say, X percentage got into an Ivy, for example. Yeah, we have kids get into Ivies, but we also have students who go to community college, and I think that's okay. I'm saying that right here, that's okay.
Because and you celebrate those students just as much as anyone else, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that's our marketing. I think it's just celebrating those wins that are maybe what some consultants don't feel like that's, why some people may say, why would someone hire a consultant to help a child look at community college options? The reality is that sometimes we have families who come to us who think that their children maybe aren't even college bound, that they, and maybe they aren't, maybe they should be looking at trade schools. Maybe we look at what should be their next step, not necessarily, what's the next 4-year college option for them. We really do assess, the fit for the student. And the other piece is sometimes financially, the community college transition piece does make sense. We don't just work with families in the 1%. So we do have families who really, they're looking at the financial implications of those choices. So anyway, so for me, I market those kinds of things, our outcomes, but in a different way than I think a lot of other consultant teams do. So yeah, it's changed quite a bit, but and always is. I think it's important to always be looking at what's important. You're asking families, why did you hire us? What did you find value in? That kind of stuff. And then market those things, because sometimes what we think is the most important thing that we're offering is not. So I know sometimes people don't like to survey families or parents, about outcomes or what their feelings, customer service surveys, but as much as we might not want to see that information, that we're afraid it's helpful, it's necessary.
It is. I always have a pit in my stomach when I hit send on those surveys, because you just never know what's going to come back. But I think it's so valuable to read and understand. And to your point, one of the things that the first couple of years I was in business, I had a mom say to me, and of course, this was before I had my own children. So really, I was clueless about what it's really like to be a mom. So, and the mom was in my office, of course, crying, it's April of senior year. And she's like, thank you for saving my relationship with my daughter the last year she lived under my roof. And at the time, I didn't even realize that impact, right? And that was an unintended benefit. That's not why I got into business. But now it's something that we talk to parents about because it's true, right? Like you can person, you can be the nag so mom and dad can take a step back. So yeah, and that I would have never known that, obviously, unless parents started sharing. So sometimes it's good to seek that feedback, even when you feel you may not want it.
I agree.
So you're a mom of triplets, you run a very successful business, you were IECA president, all of the things. Can you give us, and this is a selfish question, Kristina, I want to know what your favorite productivity hack is. Like, how do you do this?
I'm gonna get a big F on this. My productivity hack, actually, it's not so much a hack, but I think it's a commitment to prioritizing yourself and your wellness and your family. For me, is makes me more productive, actually. And I say, a few years ago, I started running. I should put running in air quotes because it's more like stumbling gracefully though. But I started running, but it was for me because I just needed time to focus on myself a bit. I'd gotten to a point where I would wake up, check my phone, and I was on, I was reading Inside Higher Ed by 7:30 in the morning, and then I'm onto the Chronicle, and then I'm listening to webinars, and then I'm doing this and this and this. And then next thing I know, the day would be like, it would be the end of the day, and I had literally sat in a chair all day. And so I realized I needed to do something for me that would help just make my day go smoother. So my productivity hack is just, I really look at my day every single day. The day before, I look at my schedule for the next day. I try not to look so far in advance. I try not to look like 3 or 4 days out, because it gets stressed. You get stressed when you look at your week. But if you can look at your day coming up and actually spend time or put in intentional time for you, that's such a cheesy thing. I mean, something, oh yeah, self-care, but it is a game changer for me, because I show up for my student meetings much more excited about them, less like, oh, it's another meeting, or if I have a meeting with, that I have to go to, that's a business related meeting. If I know I've taken some time for myself, then I do that. So my day, every day I drop my kids off at school. I'm a driver, so to and from school with my kids every single day. And I have been since they started school, which is weird for a lot of people. But I am one of those people who has heard that, your best conversations with your kids are in the car. So I take advantage of that. As soon as I drop my kids off, I go for about a 3-mile walk with my dog. And this is so silly, but I listen to the Today Show on the radio on my AirPods while I'm walking my dog. It's not work related. It is nothing. I get my vitamin D. I live in Ohio, so that's rare, but I do that every day. If I don't do that, I joke with my husband that my day is off. It is off for me. But it's become a habit. And if you've ever read Atomic Habits, it's that kind of thing. Once you do something, it becomes that. So it's not on my calendar, but I know that's what my appointment is. So when you talk about hacks, everyone talks about calendar tools, but I will say Calendly changed my life, because I can mark out when I am free and when I'm not. And so it's not just a free for all on my calendar. People have to choose the times I'm available. And I've said this lots of times, but it's the same as with most other things we schedule, whether that's with your personal trainer, with your dentist, with your hairdresser. You schedule when they're available, right? And it shouldn't be any different for us. As long as you have availability in decent times, like you can't have all your availability during the day when your students are in school. You've got to have some evening and weekend times. But if you have enough to go around, sure, mark out Fridays. I do. I don't have Fridays ever open on my calendar. So I can choose to either spend the day catching up on books that if I'm reading something, if there's a new Jeff Salingo book out, whatever that is, listening to podcasts, webinars, or I can head to Costco if I want to. And I do sometimes. And I don't have to worry about it. They don't have to stress. So I think that productivity hack is get a calendar scheduling tool and use it, set it up, and don't feel guilty about having time blocked out. That's it.
Love that, Kristina. Amen. Love it. That was great. So as we wrap up, are there any questions that you wish I would have asked that I didn't?
Oh gosh.
Or anything else you want to share with a new consultant who may be thinking about growing or just starting their business?
Yeah, I would say for new consultants, in this world, and you asked a question earlier about like values of teams, or like what are good things about having being part of a team. And I think for new consultants starting out, it can feel slightly isolating or slightly lonely, and that maybe feeling like your only outreach to other professionals is like in the bigger association worlds. But I will say, take advantage of getting to know people, the other consultants in your region, in your community, in the affinity groups that you might be involved in. This is some of my very best friends are part of this world, are people that work as consultants. And I feel like I hear that from a lot of other people who say, gosh, they've helped me grow my business. We're not competitors, So I think that's important, is don't hesitate to reach out and meet people. And you, of course, may interact with people who don't want to be your best friend. That's okay. Then they're not the best friend for you. Same advice I give my 12-year-olds, find other friends, there's other people that will let you play in the sandbox with them. So, but I think, in terms of just getting started, I think, again, don't stretch yourself so thin to try to launch. I think you have to focus on the things that you're excited about, that make you happy in this work. To ask your why, why are you doing this? Because I think sometimes people's whys lead them to realize this isn't for them. Or maybe having a big team is not for them. That's the other thing. I've had some folks who considered expanding their business, and when they ask themselves the why, they realize it's not an important enough why to really go through the steps to do that. And so I think that that's a really important thing to do, is just assess yourself and what do you love and what do you want to get out of that? What do you want to get out of being part of a team or growing a team? I think it's really important.
Yeah, thank you, Kristina. Great advice, because you're right. Not everyone, and you don't have to grow a team in order to be successful in this business. Not the decision for everyone. Awesome. So last but not least, besides Googling Wonder Woman, how can our listeners find you?
You can find me at estrelaconsulting.com, 1L. Estrela is like I said, the Portuguese word for star. So it's a 1L, and you can find me and my awesome team there. And I always tell people I'm also accessible, except Fridays when I'm at Costco. No, but I have a lot of people who will reach out just to, get advice about things. I always tell my students, don't use the phrase pick your brain, don't reach out to someone saying, I just want to pick your brain. But if you've got questions about something, we have so many professionals besides Brooke in our industry who are experts. And so I feel like, asking a variety of people for help and advice is important, but I'm, like I said, I'm always happy to help people, and I'm a tough love person too. So I'll always let people know if, I feel like, that doesn't sound great, but then I'll give you a high five at the end. So
I love that. Kristina, thank you so much for joining me today. This was such a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me, Brooke. It was fun.